So now let's come back to the role of the veins being blocked. So again, I won't go into all the detail here, but I'll just point out that Batson, back in probably in the 1930s and 40s, discussed the venous system, particularly in looking at the venous plexus in the brain. So these are the meshes and networks of small veins that aren't major vessels, but they are alternate pathways through which, when some vessels get blocked, the blood can escape. And that's the same in the vertebral plexus in the spine. And he made the following comment, that every nerve and arterial foramen in the skull base transmits some veins in this plexus. So if you have some blockage of the venous flow, it may be possible that it affects the nerves as well. To me, this is the only explanation as to why some people who've had this treatment, this angioplasty, are recovering some of their motor skills. Because if that nerve had been severely damaged, it's not going to recover by an improvement in blood supply. But if it's latent, if the body has basically shut down its capability because it doesn't have the right vascular supply, it may still be a viable nerve. And in fact, that may be validated by some other studies in animals, in rats in particular, diabetic rats, that shows that if you increase blood flow, the nerve conduction velocity increases accordingly. So there is a direct link between nerve function and vascular supply. Another disease that this might be appropriate for is transverse myelitis. There are many similarities between that and multiple sclerosis. You know that many people with MS also have optical problems, and now there is a lot of evidence that, especially with the high-quality imaging that can be done today, that we can see vascular problems in the retina. And perhaps one of the most interesting comments here is that the occurrence of perivenular abnormalities in a region free of myelin, which is in the retina, and oligodendrocytes, provides evidence that the vascular changes in MS can occur independently of contiguous demyelination and may be the primary event in the formation of a new lesion. So again, there's a lot of evidence from different fields, in this case from study of the ocular system, that show there is a consistent story behind the vascular network. Now, again, I'll close this part with a few comments of John Bergen's work. So he was very interested also in what happens if you change the blood flow. And so he did his work on a rat, and he also occluded a mesenteric vein, so he's kind of similar to what Putnam did. But now with the modern biochemistry, he was able to go in and see some important things. He was able to see that the number of leukocytes migrating across the vessel wall increased progressively during that occlusion. So now we have some problem with the endothelium here because the blood flow has been disrupted. And so his results also demonstrate that there is an endothelial problem in the presence of abnormal flow. Now, by the way, his work comes about mostly in the study of chronic venous disease, so they're looking at peripheral vascular problems in your leg that you might have, similar to where Zamboni came from. So the neurologists need to read that literature also to realize that this has a very important impact for multiple sclerosis. So I'm sorry I have to skip some of this. So I want to get on into the part that's more relevant for you, and that is the MR imaging part. And we have some examples here of the type of stenosis that can be seen using MR imaging, and the advantage of this is that you get all the vessels in a single scan. So unlike ultrasound, where you can probe things very nicely and get a response throughout the cardiac cycle real time, which is a big advantage to ultrasound. You can't get this full three-dimensional information. Here on this example, we have a very narrowed pencil-like stenosis, and look at the collaterals that develop here. The body has taken over in a different way to try to compensate for this. Again, this is a clear sign for the interventional person what the abnormalities are here. Another person with double stenosis, another person with multiple stenosis, and again you see the high collaterals that have formed. So it's a very nice way to understand what's happening. Here, if you were to go up with a catheter and go into this point, you wouldn't be going into the sigmoid sinus. You can't get there because this is a truncular venous malformation as described by Zamboni. Another example where this person has no jugulars, but the deep cervical veins actually take over the role of the jugulars here, become enlarged, and again, if this person didn't have that vertebral plexus, they would have been in big trouble. So there are alternate pathways for this. Here we can see a tremendous development of the vertebral plexus with all sorts of interconnections. And yet in this particular individual, almost no vertebral plexus. One of the things we're beginning to ask here is normally you need that vertebral plexus. When you stand up, your jugulars usually stop working and the vertebral plexus takes over. So what about this person? Maybe this person actually does better lying down than standing up. But he has a lot of vascular abnormalities. And maybe there's nothing we can do about this because that vertebral plexus is extremely complicated. Here's an example where the jugular comes down, narrows, doesn't connect to the jugular stump, but veers off into the external jugular. So there, as you can see, there are many, many variants here. So it's very important to have the imaging component associated with this. And I have a feeling, just as the sound didn't work, my movie's not going to work. It was an image showing the three-dimensional rotation of these. Again, if you go to the site ms-mri.com, you can see examples of these 3D